Next up, we've got Eduard Krivanek. Eduard is a full-stack engineer whose focus mostly lies at the front end using the Angular framework. He has a nice record of building whole production applications by himself, such as portfolio assets and issue tracking systems. As for the personal stuff, Eduard is interested in science, technology, finance, and enjoys creating open source projects. Eduard, floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you for the introduction. So, hi guys, what's up? Welcome to our presentation about using function calls in Angular. So, if you are starting out with this framework, or even if you are a more experienced developer in Angular, I believe you might take away something interesting from this presentation. And as always, the example, the source code can be found at the GitHub. Okay, so we need a demo application to demonstrate our problem and solutions. And for that, let's say a manager comes to us and asks us to implement a search system when we can select some anime content and display it in a table because, well, movie sucks. And well, that's all, like just select some item and display it at the table. Okay, it doesn't sound so complicated. So we have some search component, we have some header component, but what is interesting is as we display the table, the last column of the table, that custom field will be a number that has to be calculated on the UI, on the client side, and later on the server side of the application. And it's quite a huge equation if you look at it, and based on the score of the item, we want to calculate a result. And if you are wondering what this equation actually means, well, it means absolutely nothing. I just needed something to demonstrate this problem. Okay, so we're going to take a look at 5 approaches how we could solve this problem. The first one is how a junior developer, or most of us who started with Angular framework, would solve this problem. And I will tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly side of this solution. The third approach will be like using pipes, how like more advanced Angular developer would solve this problem, how the majority of us would solve this problem. And last but not least, I will introduce a programming pattern called memoization or dynamic programming, which is not an Angular related pattern, and it can be used in like whatever client-side framework. Okay, so function calls, like pretty easy. You are looping through your data in your HTML and you are defining some function inside the component and you calculate the result. And let's check an example, and we see we are console logging something in our application. And what you can see actually that this works for each item. We can calculate this custom field, but what you could see is lots of console log at the side. And this is because how Angular change detection works. We are not going to go deep into the rabbit hole like what is change detection, but you need to know that it is used to notify Angular whether the view of the component has changed, whether it should re-render the component. However, when this logic of the change detection is running, Angular cannot remember the previous value of this function that is being used in the template. And that's because each time there's some user event like clicking on the button, writing into the form, and that change detection is performed. Each time it has to re-evaluate this function and recalculate the value. And in 1 second, it might happen like 4 to 5 times. So the question is like, is this even a problem? We are computing this value like 5 times per second. And if we run some performance test, for example, for 1000 item, which is a really rare case that we are displaying 1000 items on the UI, it takes just 35 milliseconds. So times 5, it takes around 10% of the time to compute all these values. However, keep in mind that I'm using the latest M1 Pro, and you might have a slower computer where it takes more time, and the end user might have an even slower computer. So the slower computer you have, the less performant your application will be. So keep that in mind. But what is more serious with this approach is that if your function is actually using a HTTP request to get the data from the server side, what might end up happening is, because this function is re-evaluated every time when that change detection happens when there is some user event, you may accidentally fire lots of API requests to your server, and you might accidentally DDoS your server side and crash your server if you don't want. So how most of us would solve this problem is introducing pipes. So basically just copying the code that was previously in our component into a pipe. And pipes are useful in Angular because if the reference of the input value is not changed, so for example, if our anime input value is not changed, the logic will not be reevaluated on any change detection. So you can see like kind of if we select 3 elements, we are making only 3 API requests for the server to calculate this value, 1 API request per 1 element, and it will not happen like more times if there is some user event. And ignore that the API calls are failing. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay, but what if this is not an option? You know, what if you are like hundreds of function calls all around your application? Like, do you really want to create a pipe for each function call? Like, probably not. It would be a waste of time to refactor your application. So the question might be like, is there another solution for that? And well, that's why we are here. The answer is yes. You can introduce a programming pattern called dynamic programming or memoization. So what is that? Memoization is just storing the result of some expensive calculation and then return that result if you have the same input value. And this is exactly like what we can see in the code. Like we have some cache where the key value is a stringified object. So in our case, is that anime object we are getting from the server, and the value is the result of the function we want to execute on this object. And we are just checking like whether the object exists in the cache. If not, then just perform this calculation and then return the value from the cache. And okay, this sounds cool. This sounds a little bit complicated. Like, how can I use this in my real life? Well, if you are using TypeScript, what you can do is introduce TypeScript decorators. Once again, like ignore the code, you don't have to understand it. But what is cool though is you can wrap your function in a component with this custom memoized decorator. And as you can see in the video, if I select the same item multiple times, only once we can see that console log. You can see a console log on the distinct if we select a distinct item. So yeah, that's kind of cool. That's actually, we are caching the result of the computation and just returning the result from the cache, what is an O1 operation. So yeah, that's cool. And the last but not least, what I want to show you is what if you are using pipes to load the data from the server side. And the problem with pipes are that if you are using it in the for loop, then each time you are using the pipe inside the for loop, you are creating a new instance of that class in the memory. And the second and third instance cannot remember the result of the first one. So if you are displaying the same item multiple times, for each item you are making an API request to calculate this data, even though you would not have to do that because you already have the calculated result from the first item. So to solve this problem, what you can do is actually like merge the logic of this dynamic programming, this caching mechanism into a pipe. So basically what you can do is create a static cache property for a class. I will quickly tell you why does it have to be a static. And you are just checking whether ID or title or whatever key of that object is inside the cache. If so, then just return that value from a cache. If not, then make an API request, and if that API request finish, then save the result into the cache. And you have to use static property because if you have multiple object instances, then each instance share a static property between them. And you can see the result that if I select the same item multiple times, then there is only one API call, and then the rest of them are returning the value from the cache. Okay, that was a quick run through multiple examples. So key takeaways are: avoid using function calls in your Angular application. It's really slows down the performance, and it's a bad architecture design. Create pipes if you need to calculate something in the template or make an API call in a template. And if there is no option, then consider using caching or memoization for hard and repeated computation on the client or the server side. And well, that was everything from me, and thank you for your attention.